In this presentation, we're going to set up items. We're going to be setting up the service items. These are going to be items that we can be using in order to populate and help us to populate our invoices and sales receipts. Let's zoom into it with Xero. Here we are in our Get Great Guitars dashboard. Now, what's our objective as we enter these items? Note that our objective really is not at this point in time to really enter something into our statements in terms of our beginning balances for our financial statements. We're going to enter the service items. We want to do this first, however, to think about what will be on the balance sheet, and that's going to be the inventory items. So we're going to do this in a step-by-step process. The items are used to populate the invoice, and if it's an inventory item, and we need to put it on the books, we want to list the item and then the items that we currently have, if possible, into the system so the system can then track the inventory items. We're going to start with these service items, which aren't related to anything on the balance sheet. They're going to be used to help us populate the invoice because they're a little bit easier for us to start with rather than the inventory items, which are going to add a couple other components, and we'll kind of step up into that. So the other reason that we would want to, of course, set up items, inventory items, and service items is to help us populate our documents. For example, for the service items, the main document that it would be populating or help us to populate would be an invoice. So for example, if we were to say add here and we were going to create an invoice, we want to make the population process of that invoice, as we've discussed in prior presentations, as easy as possible. The way to do that is you can imagine someone that just knows data input. You want to imagine someone that just knows how to basically do the bare minimum to enter an invoice and, send it out. What we want the bare minimum to be is to just select an item here, whatever item we are selling. We're imagining, hey, we're selling this service item. We did an hour service, or we did some kind of standard service product, tuning of the guitar, guitar lessons, and we would like them to just be able to pick this and set it up and have the invoice auto-populate. To do that, we need to set up the items so that they can be easily picked up. Now, remember, when you're doing the items then, even if you're a service company, you have to think about how you're going to bill someone as easily as possible. So if you have kind of packaged service items, we're talking service items, not inventory items right now, then you want to think, like, you could do an hourly rate. Obviously, you could just say, here's my hourly rate and multiply times an hourly rate. The problem with that is oftentimes that, the hourly rate has some drawbacks in terms of how many hours it's going to take, what's going to be the estimate for those items. A lot of times, if you can move to kind of like a package set price, even though that could be more difficult, it could be better for your sales sometimes and easier to populate the invoice, less time for you to take to kind of figure things out after you've already figured out the set price. So for example, instead of just charging an hourly rate for guitar lessons, we might have some kind of package deal with guitar lessons and tunings and whatnot all in one place. Or if we did service items for the cars or something like that, we might not do it by hour. It might just say, hey, this is how much it takes for an oil change. This is how much it takes for this and that, whatever service we're doing. And rather than trying to track the hours, we're just going to say, hey, we've got it down to a package deal. This is how much we're going to charge per item. And that can be an easier system to use, easier to populate into the invoice without people needing to know much more than just how to populate that into an invoice. So that's what we're going to practice setting up now. So to think about those items, then we're going to go to the accounting dropdown. The business dropdown. We want to go to the product and services. So product and services page. So this is where we're going to add the products and services that will help us to populate the invoices and the sales, like the sales receipts if we got paid at the same point in time. So there's a couple ways we can do this. We're going to think about this in two sections. You could think of them as one, like updating both your service and inventory items. I'm going to break the two out so we can consider them in a step up level of service items, less difficult, inventory items, more difficult. We can add a new item here. We can say add a new item, and we can add them one by one. Let's just tab through this field, and then we'll also think about how we can import these items, because it can be easier to import the items. If you want to import a lot of items or set up a lot of items at one time, it might be more simple to put it into Excel and then import it. Or if you're exporting them from another software, it would be easier to put it into something like Excel, simply change the formatting to whatever it's going to be useful here, and then import it. And we will take a look at that function as well. So we may have an item code, we may have an item name, like a DAR or guitar service or something like that. I purchased this item. You could have the unit price, the purchase account. So if you're purchasing it, this would be meaning it's an inventory item. If it's not an inventory item, you wouldn't check this. You might just uncheck it and say, hey, this is a service item. I'm not purchasing this because it's an hourly service. It's not something, it's not physical inventory. If it is inventory and something that you do purchase and you want to have on your purchase documentation, you'd have the unit price. We have the purchase account, which might be, if it's going into an inventory type of account, or if you're expensing it directly, cost of goods sold. Then the purchase description. Then we have I sell this item, and then the unit price. So the unit price is going to be different. If we purchase it, the unit price you would think would be less than the sales price here, of course. And then the sales account, which might be a revenue type of account. And if we have a tax, then we'd have to apply basically the tax rate on it. If we have a sales tax and so on and so forth type of taxes. And then I track this inventory. Now note, even though we have the purchases up here, like we purchase it and then sell it, you have to, if you want the inventory tracking to be done for it to actually track the inventory units, then you have to tick this one off. I track this item. So, and we read right here, this treats your item as a tracked inventory asset. Xero will record the quantity on hand and prevent you from selling below a quantity of 0. So then if I close this out, now, if we want to add a lot at a time, we might want to use an importing feature. So if we use the importing feature, and if I was going to add the items, and then you could think about, notice the opening balances down here if you had inventory items. We're going to go to the items, though, here. So we can go to add the item, and then we're going to get this download sheet. So we could use this practice download sheet, which will help us to get, well, not practice. This will be the one that's going to help us to get the headers correctly. So you could read through this. You want to download this worksheet. Then you want to take whatever information you have for the items and put it into a similar format or into this worksheet template format. And then you can change it to a CSV file, which is basically an Excel file. You can save an Excel to a CSV file, which is kind of like a simplified Excel file without all the kind of stuff in it that might mess up the importing process in terms of formatting and that kind of stuff. And then you would import it here, and it should be imported all right. So if we were then to open this up, now there is not two separate sheets for the service items and inventory items. If you're going to be entering service items into the system, then you could use the same sheet. You just won't have all the information in it, right? You just don't need all the information. I'm going to highlight all these. I'm going to make them larger so that we can see them. So then we have the item code. We have, and this is basically the same fields that we saw when we entered the data input or looked at the data input in the prior side. So we have the item code, the item name, the purchase description, the purchase unit price, then the purchase account. So notice we wouldn't have the purchase unit price if we didn't purchase these items. The purchase account we wouldn't have if we were not purchasing. If they're service items, in other words, we wouldn't have that. Purchase tax rate, again, we wouldn't have it if we weren't purchasing it. Sales description, so if we're selling it, we want the sales description. Service item would probably have that. Sales unit price, and that's the sales price we would have no matter what service or inventory. And then the sales account, what account does it go into for the sales? Sales tax rate, inventory asset account, wouldn't have it unless it was an inventory asset. And then the cost of goods sold account. So what we'll do next time is we'll actually populate this with just our service items only, which are going to be these items. So I'm going to imagine that we took these from like another software, we downloaded it, and these are the description items that we have for these service items. We need to take this information, put it into the Xero worksheet, and then we can use that to upload it to the Xero software.